Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Blair Embry. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Prison Yoga Project, and we are honored today to be hosting Sonia Brown-Diaz. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I will do a formal introduction of Sonia. She will offer a land acknowledgement, and then we're going to go into a centering opportunity. Sonia Brown-Diaz, RYT 200, has been using trauma-informed yoga practices for over 16 years. After having completed PYP training in Brixton in 2018, Sonia founded Yoga on the Inside, an affiliate partner of PYP and Australian ambassador, and has introduced trauma-informed yoga classes and programs around Australia, which is 15 programs across 9 prisons and counting. With the assistance of local facilitators, Yoga on the Inside programs are gaining more interest as the benefits for incarcerated people continue to be evident. Yoga on the Inside has partnered with other organizations who support impacted individuals by trauma or mental health issues, such as Mates for Mates, who offer veterans support services beyond DV, and the NDIS by providing trauma-informed yoga classes to those they serve. Thank you so much for being here, Sonia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm very humbled and nervous.
We're so excited. The amount of programs that you have started is incredible, and I'm so excited to hear. And the theme really for today that we want to dive into is about cultural care. So will you lead us in a formal land acknowledgement? I would love to hear about reciprocity and what this process is. And then you can lead us in a centering opportunity as well.
Okay, so we begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the unceded land on which we meet and practice. And in Brisbane, that's the Meanjin peoples. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of all the lands on which we meet and practice, work and live. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. We recognise this land always was and always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lands.
Thank you.
So for our centering practice today, it's going to be quite gentle. And I'm just going to encourage you to find a comfortable seat, whatever that seat may look like for you. So it could be if you're sitting down on a chair, that's perfectly fine. If you're on the ground, you can be cross-legged if that feels right for your body. You may be laying down. You may choose to stand up, whatever feels right for your body right now. And starting with a little bit of movement so we can really feel where our body is in space. So where our body is physically right now. So if you're sitting, you may want to rock from side to side. If you're sitting in a chair, you may want to press your feet into the ground. You may want to make a little bit of movement with your shoulders, if that feels right for you. And then slowly coming to some form of stillness so that we can be here settled in our bodies for the next few minutes. So starting by taking a few deep breaths in. And this may feel like your whole body breathing, or it may feel like just your natural breath. It may feel very gentle and smooth, or it may feel like you're actually making some sort of conscious effort. So perhaps starting by taking shorter breaths in and longer breaths out. And what that may look like for you is you may like to count the breath in to say 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever feels right for your body, and then making the exhale slightly longer. And your choice is always here to either have your eyes closed, and if that doesn't feel right for you right now, you can perhaps bring your chin slightly to your chest and taking a gaze down towards the ground or towards your legs, or keeping your eyes fully open. And so noticing our breath now as we return to a normal breathing pattern, whatever that might look like for you. And starting to bring some awareness into our bodies. So noticing any parts of your legs or feet that are making contact with the surface beneath you. Noticing if your shoulders are hunched up towards your ears, and perhaps softening those shoulders a little bit by dropping them away from the ears. Bringing your attention now to your hands and where they may be resting on your body. And if it's a little bit difficult perhaps to bring your attention to the felt sense of the body, you may like to take your attention instead to your other senses like sound or smell. So maybe listening out for sounds that are around you. Or any smells that you can notice in the air. And noticing maybe when your mind starts to wander a little and being okay with that. Just noticing and seeing if you can redirect your attention back to your senses, whether it's your breath passing through your body, or where your body is making contact with the surface beneath you, or your sense of hearing or smell. And we're going to slowly start to bring our attention and our bodies to a sense of being awake. You may want to wriggle toes or fingers or make some small gentle movements with your body. You may like to open your eyes at this stage if you've had them closed. You may want to rock back and forth on your seat if that feels good for you. And I'm going to make some movements with my body just to sort of open it up and really wake up my body so that I can be present for what comes up next. Taking a deep breath in. And a long breath out. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. That was beautiful. I would love to start with our trademark question. What is your first memory of yoga?
Oh. First memory of yoga, and this will get a little bit deep. So I'm just putting a little disclaimer here that this may be sensitive to some people. It is still sensitive to me, but I've done a lot of work on myself, and but it still may be sensitive to other people. So I just acknowledge that some of these topics that I raise may be triggering for others. So, so my first experience of yoga was around 2015, so 17 years ago now. Sorry, 2005. And it had been by then 2 years since the stillbirth of my twin sons, Izaak and Kurtis. And by this stage now in 2005, my daughter had come along, Olivia. And Olivia came along with her own set of gifts, some which were, well, they were all surprises, but they were nevertheless gifts. So Olivia's gifts were quite challenging at the beginning. And I think having had the experience of the loss of my sons and then not long after that falling pregnant with Olivia, I sort of hadn't had the chance, I don't think, at least in retrospect, to really process that grief, probably in a way that would have been more healthy than what I actually had. So eventually when Olivia comes along with her set of issues, really, which at the time of birth were deemed terminal, and she's 17 now, so she's all well and good, but at the time were deemed terminal with a massive congenital heart defect and a diagnosis of Down syndrome after that. So it was sort of this compound trauma that I later learned was compound trauma or complex trauma. So navigating everything that was going on with Olivia was quite challenging. So I started going to yoga classes just in the local community. And the way I explain it is that I really just went for a bit of gentle exercise because, I just had a baby and I didn't want to do anything too strenuous. And I noticed that and I'm going to be quite blunt here, but all this shit started stirring up. All this stuff started surfacing and I did not know what to do with it. But it felt good. I didn't know what to do with it, but I was happy that it was happening, even though I was in tears. And all this stuff started coming to the surface. And then with years of therapy afterwards, I noticed that, or I realized that this was all, I had been holding and storing this stuff in my body for so long that I just didn't know how to function any other way. And I wasn't really functioning. For a long time, I wasn't really functioning. Only about 7 years ago, I was diagnosed with PTSD. So it was a pretty late diagnosis. But then that made sense as to why I was so dissociated, why I was not in my body at all. I felt like the way I described it was I felt like I was walking around with my head and my body completely disconnected. Like I knew my body was walking, but the two weren't connected. And that's the way it sort of physically felt for me, that I just couldn't, it was a really tough time. And for me, yoga started reconnecting me back with my body, reconnecting me and allowing me to grieve, which I had sort of just for survival purposes, put on hold. And I didn't want to go there a lot. I didn't want to go into those spaces. So yoga gave me that opportunity to be with myself, to allow myself to engage with my body in a way that I found quite gentle. So I was very lucky that I just happened to go to a yoga studio locally that the facilitation now in retrospect was very trauma-informed. And so, and then it just became part of my practice, my daily practice as part of, I guess, a whole bunch of modalities towards healing and recovery. Yoga was part of that. It absolutely, and it still is today, and it's become different now. It's become, it's using all the 8 limbs of yoga now. It's not just the asana practice, the body movement. It's not just breath work. It's not just meditation. It's a way of life, and I accredit this way of life now to my boys who passed, because I think were it not for them and that experience, as tragic as it was, I honestly don't feel I would have gone down this path, because I know what it's like to live in a body that is really challenging, in a mind that's really challenging. And so now when I'm in a space with others who are equally as, challenged in their own ways, that compassion is authentically there, and my boys have given me this purpose now. So it's wonderful. This is my purpose, and it's heart work. For me, this is heart work, so, Thank you for allowing me to share that.
I was just going to say thank you for sharing that with us, with such a vulnerable piece of your story and the grief and transformation that you allowed to come through as well. And thank you. I'm also just so happy that you were able to find yoga that held you in this space.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm
just going to take a moment for that all to really sink in. I can hear when you tell the story as well, the disassociation that happens, to be able to open the door to grief. It's like you don't know where, if the bottomless pit does have an ending, right? It's like, I can't open that door because I don't know when it will end or if it will ever end.
Yeah. And that is a constant challenge, because societal narratives are that, and I got this from my workplace at the time. My workplace at the time was like, oh, it's 6 months, aren't you over this yet? kind of thing, So there was a lot of pressure from, and I know because I speak to other parents and I speak to other people who are grieving all sorts of griefs, like it doesn't have to be loss of children. And there is a societal pressure to get over it and move on. And I choose not to do it that way. And that's hard because then I find it hard because it's almost like I need to defend it or, justify it. And it's like, no, that's It is a personal choice to stay in that grief, but the way that grief unfolds and shifts and moves is not like it was at the beginning. So it morphs, it changes over time, and that's okay. And sometimes you go back to that real rawness, on events like birthdays and Christmas and, special occasions. Yeah, for sure. But it's hard to navigate, and there's no rule book for it. So it's.
And thank you. And thank you for bringing it into the conversation too, right? Because I think it's grief and loss and death, really. It's something we don't want to look at in our culture or a lot of cultures, I'll say. And so it's something that people turn away from. I don't know how to look at this. I don't know how to hold you. I don't know how to handle this. I don't even know how to deal with my own grief. So I'm going to look away, and I need you to get over it as fast as possible, because I can't handle watching you struggle, right? Or whatever other people's narratives are. So how did your grief transform into a way that you wanted to serve other people?
If I'm really honest, it was just acknowledging that I'm not in this alone, that there are hundreds and thousands of people that I could walk past on the street every day, and they have their own story, whether it's grief and loss or something else, whether it's a traumatic event of any type. Because I know that when I facilitate in the prisons here, and I share my story, perhaps not in the level of detail that I've been to now, but it's that common understanding that regardless of the traumatic event itself and the detail around that, how it manifests in us is pretty much, there's a lot of common threads there. So a lot of us dissociate, a lot of us numb our pain in whatever way we do it. It could be shopping, it could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be, sex, it could be anything, right? A lot of us have problems sleeping. So, we disconnect with our bodies. So the way in which trauma manifests in the human body, regardless of the event, is something that can connect us all. And I think for me, that's the important thing. It's not about my story. It's not about my experience and my event. It's the way I feel is the way a lot of people feel, regardless of the detail around the event, And I think there's an important part of me that, we'll get into this later with the cultural sensitivity and cultural awareness, is acknowledging that this has happened to someone, because I think that acknowledgement is what unites us, is what connects us. When we don't acknowledge, that's what I feel is quite divisive in our society in general,
Yeah, it's part of the reciprocity piece. I think it's also, it's seeing the acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And I hear that there's even a permission piece in that. It allows people to show up fully as themselves.
And I think in my experience, it's that when I do share that vulnerable side of myself, and very authentically, and I'll have tears in class, and the participants will go, yeah, me too, and so I see your pain, you're seeing mine, and I see yours, and we don't need to know the detail, but the pain is there.
When did you start training to be a yoga teacher or offer, or what was the next step after you started acknowledging the grief.
But the next step for me was that I kept practicing for a good decade afterwards, after I'd started. And I guess it wasn't till I had done a lot of my own healing work with therapists and what have you, and that I realized that if this is helping me in such a profound way as an adjunct to other therapies, as an adjunct, like it's not the panacea for healing, but it contributes to my healing in a very positive way, I feel. So if it has that potential for me, then why would I not want to explore this and share it with others, or at least make it accessible? Because as I kept going to different studios to attend classes, I was very triggered. I was very triggered by touch. At some points I enjoyed it, but at some points I didn't, and I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to honor my body and go, this doesn't feel right for me, because I had this desire to please the teacher and to keep up, and it felt very performance-based, and it wasn't resonating with me on many levels. So it was probably, I can't remember when it was, but I did my teacher training only in 2018. And I did it at Byron Yoga Centre, and it was with the intention, like I think a lot of yoga teachers, that just go, I just want to deepen my practice. I don't want to teach. And I still honestly have no idea how this has happened, but because I can't pinpoint the time, but I've been following James Fox's work for Prison Yoga Project for years. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was coming up in Facebook feeds, or I honestly have no idea, but I know that I was somehow connected to his work and what he was doing, and it just landed for me. But it also landed for me in a way that I was noticing how my daughter with a disability was having difficulty accessing anything in society, purely because of a label that she holds, or that she's been given. And so I was like, okay, well, this is, for me, my work, I want it to be around accessibility, and not that because of the place you reside, which could be a prison or could be a detention centre for refugees, or it could be a group home for people with disability. There's so many places that people reside in. They don't all reside in happy homes, either because of those things or because of the label you've been given that you don't have the equal access that other people have the privilege of. So when I did my teacher training, and then in 2018, that same year that I did my teacher training, somehow it magically appeared that James was doing training in the UK with Josephine Wickstrom, and I'm going to go do this training. So I went and did the training, and I had organised I reached out to James and Josephine to have a pre-meeting prior to the training. And we caught up, and just there and then, James was so supportive. Anything you need, happy to help. And it's gone way beyond that, like his ability to mentor, and Bill and yourself and Nicole and Josephine, your mentorship has meant so much to me. But after having done James's training, I was really quite firm and quite passionate that I could integrate my purpose of bringing this trauma-informed approach of yoga not only to people who are incarcerated, but to other marginalised groups. So I guess what we call marginalised groups, at least in the Australian community. So it really fueled that fire. It's like, okay, I didn't want to teach, but now I do. but I've got no desire to teach in a studio because there's plenty of that. They're catered for, but there's a whole bunch of people who aren't, So, yeah.
What happened next?
Well, next, oh, God, I did a lot of work. I probably researched for about 6 months on what was going on here in the Australian criminal justice system in terms of rehabilitation programs. And I noticed that and look, I'll go back because that research showed me a couple of things. The first thing it showed me was that they don't divulge too much on their websites as to what they actually do. So it's very generic, We've got alcohol and other drug programs. We've got domestic violence programs. We've got sex offender rehabilitation programs. But it doesn't say what those things are. So it revealed that to me that, even the family members of people who are incarcerated really don't know, have got no way of knowing from a public perspective of what's going on in terms of rehabilitation programs. And secondly, it highlighted to me, from what I could see, that the majority of rehabilitation programs were criminogenic or criminogenic, however you want to pronounce it, programs. So it was to address the offending. So, if your offence was related to alcohol and other drugs, or you had an alcohol or drug addiction issue, we'll address that, which is great. If you're a sex offender, we'll have a program for you. And they're all wonderful programs, but I felt in having a look at this that there wasn't anything really about generic well-being. My theory has always been you can educate people in prison, you can have literacy and numeracy programs to, raise the education standard so that then when they leave, when they're released back into community, they've got that as something that they can take away with them, and that's really beneficial. But if you still don't have the ability to regulate your emotions, it's no good that you can read and write because you're going to be more likely to reoffend if you don't have other tools. And so those tools, to me, from what I could see, just looking at, corrective services all around Australia, just looking at their websites, at that time, there didn't seem to be a lot of transparency in terms of what they offered for the well-being of a human being that would help them when they're released so that they're able to engage their nervous system in a healthy way. They're able to, think before they act, be less impulsive. So I started looking at what James was doing and what you guys were doing in the US, and I thought, well, surely that's possible here. And I did months and months of research and found that there had been one pilot program done in Canberra in the Australian Capital Territory. It was a 10 or 12-week pilot program. The evidence was quite clear, although there wasn't. I guess that the program didn't go long enough, and so the evidence was quite clear that it was beneficial, but there wasn't enough real data around it. So I thought, I've got to do something here. So, I started approaching the prisons, and that was hard because I don't know what it's like in other countries, but there is no information on who the person is to contact. So I dug up annual reports and strategic plans and business plans, and all of a sudden there was a name, and, it's like a treasure hunt. It's like a treasure hunt. I was like, just putting the pieces together of the puzzle and going, now I have a name. I'm going to approach that. Like, it was hard. It was hard work. But then I was given an opportunity to present to a group of what they call violence prevention coordinators here in Queensland. So through Queensland Corrective Services, they gave me an opportunity to present a proposal. So I put a proposal together and had a chat, and then from there, that's when things started happening. So we've had a program now going in Brisbane Women's Correctional Centre for 3 years. From that one meeting, and now we've got 15 odd programs around 9 prisons, and that's growing. So now there's more interest from New South Wales. So we've just finished a pilot program, a 10-week pilot program. We finished at the end of August in the first prison in New South Wales. That's gone exceptionally well. And now there's more interest from another 3 prisons in New South Wales. So, it takes time and work. And I think like any country, the minute that you're dealing with government, you have to really quickly bring into practice your sense of patience because nothing happens fast. And therein lies the practice.
It's incredible, the amount of rigor and determination and patience that you cultivated, and all of the fruit that is being now available because of all of the seeds that you planted over time, right? And now prisons are coming to you for programs.
Yeah.
Yes. Incredible. So, and I want to hear more about the Australian system. And I agree. It's, and you spoke to it. I wrote down transparency, right? It's basically like, you have holding websites for prisons or jails or detention centers, and it doesn't speak to what actually happens, and you don't know who's in charge. You don't know the language of who's in charge, who makes decisions, who does budgets. So I love hearing this, the investigation hat that you put on and digging through the internet and paperwork. It's really incredible.
I have a marketing diploma, which I've never used, but now in this sense, it's come in really handy because now I can put that marketing hat on and really try to investigate and do my research and, do that comparison of what other services are out there. If I put my business hat on, it's like, who's my competition? So I do have to do that. So whilst this is hard work, I need to do that due diligence in order and I'll be really clear here that, I'm really invested in keeping the integrity of the program, especially James's work that we do leverage from and his training, to keep the integrity of James's work always as the focal point so that we don't dilute, the programs. They don't become just go into prison and teach yoga. No. To me, that's what I'm super, super passionate about and focused on is that we don't water down something just because we have a desire to serve, but we also have the potential to do more harm than good. So I'm really cautious, and that cautiousness comes into when I interview people who are interested in becoming facilitators, when we have an opportunity and I put a post or an ad and I invite people to express interest, that interview process for me is quite rigorous because I want to make sure that we have the right fit, because of the people that we're serving. It's there at the center of this. It's not about us. Yeah.
And the trauma-informed piece, right? Like most yoga teacher trainings prepare you for a studio yoga class. Yeah. And you spoke to how you were triggered so many yoga classes. So really having the preparation to be able to go in and know how to care and serve a specific population is so important. And maybe this is the perfect time to get into it now too. You know, this cultural awareness piece for bringing in trauma-informed yoga.
Yeah.
You know, Australia has, I don't know all of the specifics, but a long history of colonization that is still impacting people today. And maybe you can take the lead on whether there's history to briefly catch us up on, and maybe some numbers for the populations that you serve as well.
Okay. So I'll give you some numbers, and this comes from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So they're the ones that capture data for an array of different areas within Australia. So in terms of the criminal justice system here in Australia and how it's governed and managed, they're managed at a state-by-state level. So we've got 6 states in Australia and 2 major mainland territories. The states and territories, they assume the major responsibility and powers for social issues, including legislative powers, and for the administration of criminal justice. So it's a state-by-state scenario. So Australia's got no one single criminal justice system. It's a state-by-state scenario. But we've got federal laws. Okay. But from a criminal justice system perspective, it's a state-by-state scenario. So you can commit a crime in this state, and the way that it's dealt with, it can be completely different in another state. And because you can have a law, you can, I think we were saying prior to, when we got on the chat beforehand, that say, for example, there are things that are legal in one state that are illegal in another state. So weed, marijuana, whatever you want to call it, is legal in some states and illegal in another state. So in one state, it's criminalised. In another state, it's decriminalised. So it's state by state, our criminal justice system here. In terms of numbers, so our country's population is roughly around the 24 million, a little bit less. So it's not a big population when you think about the land mass, but most of our people live on the outskirts of Australia. We have our rates of incarceration roughly, this is middle of this year, these statistics, was 196 people per 100,000. So this is general population we're talking about. We're not touching on Indigenous figures yet. The average prison term or imprisonment term is 36 months. And the number of prisons that we have here in Australia is 111, which is not a lot when, I guess for the population it is, but, when I hear about the number of prisons in the US, like one state might have 111 prisons. So, it is, I think it's valuable to compare, but then sometimes it's, the numbers don't quite match up. However, this is, I think, the really thing that it hurts my heart, that there's a real disproportionate rate of people who are from Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander lands who are incarcerated. And the incarceration rates for them is 10 times higher than the rest of the Australian population. And the main reason that I guess is documented is, complex issues such as traumatic history, and generational disadvantage. And when I look at, not when I look at, but when I'm in a space in a prison facility practicing with majority First Nations people, it is very hard to not acknowledge the impacts of our history on these people. It breaks my heart because you can see the difference in treatment that they've experienced, and so it's really important that reciprocity, we've got here in Australia a reconciliation action plan, and it tells us, it sort of guides us on what we can do, to facilitate reconciliation at an individual level, let alone, a corporate level or institutional level, at a very individual level. And that's just purely acknowledging that this stuff did happen. Even if we weren't the perpetrators, it impacts people today. And I think that's what I can relate, and my personal traumatic, experience is that I know that what I went through impacts my daughter. It didn't happen to her, but it impacts her because of the way I behave, the way I experience life, So absolutely, and I think just that pure acknowledgement that this did happen. Was it my fault directly? No, but that doesn't take away the reality for people, So it's, yeah. So there's just some of the very high level statistics. What we've got here, though, in Australia is that we've got 30% of our people who are incarcerated in general are on remand, or what we call pre-trial. So they haven't been sentenced yet. They're awaiting sentencing. And people can wait years, be waiting years to be sentenced. 4% of our prison population is juveniles. 8% is female. So the rest are males.
8%?
8% of females of the generic prison population, not Indigenous, not First Nations, just generic. And then when we look at things like the mental health issues, they're saying that 1 in 3 people entering, so they're entering, 1 in 3 have got a history of mental health disorders. And 27% are currently taking mental health related medications. So that's huge. The other interesting statistic, though, that really spoke to me, and I guess because I'm sort of close to this issue, in other parts of my life, is that 12% of the prison population has an intellectual disability. And up to 30% have a borderline intellectual disability. So, we have an overrepresentation of First Nations people. Of that population, a healthy percentage of those may have an intellectual disability or a borderline intellectual disability. And on top of that, the people who aren't First Nations and are incarcerated, and I come across them, there are a lot of people with invisible disabilities.
Potentially 32%.
Yeah, that are disadvantaged in the criminal justice procedures that go on. They may not have the best representation. They may not be able to speak for themselves. They don't have advocates. They don't have perhaps close family. They may be under the protection of the public trustee, who may or may not really care about their well-being. So we have a lot of factors that we need to consider when we are holding space for people in this setting, rightly or wrongly, they are there. And how are we going to do our best to facilitate the potential for healing, the potential for change or transformation? So, yeah, those statistics, I find them scary. I find them sad. And I'm really conscious of that we don't keep contributing to that harm, that we do our best with some level of education and some level of just generic understanding, and that could be doing some cultural awareness training. It doesn't take a lot of effort. We can acknowledge by doing an acknowledgement of country at the beginning of every class, knowing the land that you're on. It's not a lot of effort, and becoming allies with people and supporting, recognizing that different cultures all around the world, this is not just Australia, different cultures all around the world have proven methods of healing. Can we somehow integrate that into the work that we do? We're not the only ones, traditional cultures like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been on this land for over 60,000 years. They didn't survive by pure luck. They had organisational structures. They had ways of being in community with themselves and with other mobs or tribes or clans. They had what they call kinship care. So it's a real family-oriented method of caring for one another, of disciplining. They had these in place way before white man came. So, we have these biases, I think, and these stereotypes in mind, but I think we often don't remember that this is one of the oldest cultures, on the planet, and they're still here. They survived. And so surely we've got something to learn, from them, that we're not the ones always teaching and they have to integrate into our world. I think there's an opportunity here for, especially in this space, that we're going into, where we're the minority. We have an opportunity to learn, and wouldn't that be wonderful if we could?
Thank you. I know that we had dropped a link in our shared document. I heard really at least two things that you could do almost immediately if you haven't done, right? Incorporating acknowledgement of country. Is it the language?
Yes, the acknowledgement of country.
Acknowledgement of country, incorporating that into every class, not just in incarcerated settings, right? How can you offer that in public studio classes as well, or anywhere you hold space? And then I also heard you say doing an Indigenous cultural training.
Absolutely.
Is there anywhere specific that you would recommend people do training with? Was it, whether it's through like an organization or an institution?
So there's a couple of things. So I don't know if I sent you the link, Blair, but I will show you quickly. I'm going to show you here. It's probably going to go backwards, but this is Yoga Australia. So Yoga Australia have got a Reflect Reconciliation Action Plan. And this document gives us guides and suggestions on how we can be more culturally aware and inclusive in our practices, and it doesn't matter where it is. And so some of the simple things and we do this anyway, like we do it as in a trauma-informed approach, that we don't use Sanskrit. Like, why do we have to use Sanskrit? So that can be one easy thing that we can go, okay, well, I'm not going to use that. And I'm not going to use it not just because I'm being culturally sensitive. It's because there's really no need. And if I don't use Sanskrit, I include everyone, regardless of race, regardless of educational level, regardless of cognitive levels or ability. So so that's just something really simple we can do. We can do the acknowledgement of country. We can do not use Sanskrit. Basic stuff, we can bring our delivery approach to a more simplistic way of delivery, that we can deliver in a more simplistic way. The effect and the outcomes are all still the same, So I guess it brings another thing to mind, though, Blair, is like, why am I doing this work? Because if I'm doing it so that I can feel better about myself, then you're in the wrong job, right? It's not for you. So it's not about me. It's about the people I'm serving. And the people I'm serving may require, like my daughter needs, adjustments, right? They require adjustments. And they're not hard to do, and they serve everyone. So you're not doing it just for these people. I need to be precious and careful about these people. It's like, this is for everyone. It benefits everyone. And I think if we look at things through a lens of benefit to all, we don't need to be, we can take all the labels away and everyone gets to benefit from a practice, or anything, whatever it is. So it's sort of, and I think really just acknowledging that people are quite wise about themselves, and sometimes they know what works for them, and not assuming that they don't because of, we look at them through some stereotypical lens, that sense of not forcing something down someone's throat because it worked for you, therefore it's going to work. But just, I think our ability to be gentle with people and welcoming and embracing other people's points of views and perceptions, and still, having our own, that's okay. But how we incorporate everyone's diversity into the practice, and then that becomes a way of living, I think,
Thank you. I heard at least, 5 ways to be able to bring trauma-informed and cultural awareness into a space holding. I also hearing you say about being able to have trauma-informed facilitation and accessibility, right?
Absolutely.
Because, all of the hidden pieces of ourselves, right? Like when you were sharing that you're in class, but you want to please the teacher.
Yeah.
It might not feel good for you. It might not be in your best interest to do this pose in this way, but you're going to do it because of a narrative that you hold, that you want to please someone in a position of power.
Yeah.
Right. So really about trauma-informed facilitation is removing hierarchy.
Absolutely.
And also still being aware that there is power in leading a group, right? It's that balance. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, which is why we facilitate in the ways that we do. We facilitate in some sort of open shape, whether it's a circle or an open square or, a rainbow, an arch, or, any of those things. So that there's some sort of level of equality. We don't go dressed up in our Lululemons and hair, makeup and we go in as equal as possible without being condescending, so we try to create, that may not land for everyone, but we're going in with the intention of trying to create a space of as much equality as possible. And then that comes down, like we were saying before, to the language that we're using. If I'm using all this language about opening up our solar plexus, all of a sudden I'm up here. I know more than you. I'm more educated than you. There's no need for that. In my experience, there's no need for it. It hasn't made my experience any better because someone used that language. So stripping the commercialism away from our yoga practice and bringing it back down to its authentic roots, I think that's what makes it accessible to everyone, should they choose to engage, and what engagement looks like is different for every individual. Within that class, it's different. And being okay with someone laying on the mat listening to the music, that's okay. That's your practice. So, yeah.
Thank you. I want to open up to our audience and community. If people have questions, now is a great time. You can start to put some of those questions into the Q&A box, and I can read them out loud, and Sonia can respond. And while we're allowing people to get into the Q&A box, I just want to give you the floor again, Sonia, for anything that hasn't been said yet to bring up, whether it's about populations or the criminal justice system in Australia, things that you've seen that have been beneficial. Anything that we just haven't touched on yet today.
One big thing that we haven't touched on, and I really wanted to do, was acknowledge all of the facilitators that we have here around Australia who make this possible, because I'm a one-man band in terms of engaging the prisons and what have you, right? That's fine. I do all the background work, and yes, I go in and facilitate, but this is not possible without amazing facilitators. So I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of the facilitators that we've had, since the beginning, that have come and gone, who are still here, new ones. I think at present we've probably got about, I'm guessing here because I can't do the maths in my head right now, but maybe about 12 facilitators. No more, probably about 15 facilitators. So in some cases where we do morning and afternoon classes, we'll have one person who does the morning and another person who comes and does the afternoon, or it just depends. But yeah, we've got an amazing group of humans who do this work and do it with passion, and they do it with purpose, and when they report back on how the experience has been for them, it reminds me of how it is for me, that I walk away with my heart so full, and it's the only way I can describe it. And I think sometimes when I'm interviewing teachers and I'm going, this is what it feels like, but you won't know until maybe it'll feel like this, and then they'll go, oh yeah, I know what you mean, once they've done it. So I'm really grateful for the teachers that we have.
And so for anyone hearing this at a later date that might be interested in facilitating with you with Yoga on the Inside in Australia, what would you say to them? What would you say to someone who might be interested in facilitating yoga?
Just drop me an email. Really, just send me an email. You've got my email address there, Blair. It's just admin@yogaontheinside.com.au. You'll have to excuse my website because it's one thing I haven't been able to get to in terms of updating it. It's a little bit out of date. I need to update it. So, yeah, just drop me an email. I mean, now at the moment, we're having discussions with 3 facilities in New South Wales. I guess the reality, and I think this is the case more than likely worldwide, is that a lot of our prison facilities are in regional areas. So, you know, we may have a lot of interest from, say, facilitators or teachers in Sydney, but there aren't too many prisons in the metropolitan area. There are some in Sydney, but there aren't too many there. So, you know, maybe there'll be one in Penrith, which is in the southwest. So there's some on the northern coast of New South Wales. So, you know, the opportunities will be there if there is a facility there that is wanting a program. But, yeah, unfortunately, I just think it's pretty common that most prisons are not in metropolitan areas. So,
which I know in the US, it's by design. Oftentimes, right? So what would you say is like the average commute to, you said it was in regional areas. What would you say is like the average commute to a prison?
You'd be looking at a minimum of half an hour, minimum. So it really depends. And that's just the travel time, right? That could be just the travel time. And then you have to allow it to be there 15 minutes beforehand because you've got to get through security. You know, you absolutely have to do an induction at the centre. That has nothing to do with us, but every centre has their own induction. And even if you are working, say here in Queensland, you know, I can work at one facility and then I go to another facility. They have their own security clearance documentation that you have to go through again. So even though you have been approved for one centre, it doesn't mean you've been approved for the whole state. And then you've got to do an induction at that centre as well. So, yeah, it's, you know, the induction's an hour, a couple of hours. It varies. So it just depends on, it goes centre by centre. But, yeah, you have to allow at least 15 minutes to get through security. Yeah.
So it varies.
It does. Yeah.
Are there anywhere as of date that you're looking specifically for facilitators? Any shout outs that we want to put out into the universe now?
So if you're in Darwin, which is on the top end of Australia, please reach out because there is potential for a program up that way. We're just waiting to hear back. If you're in the southwest around the Penrith, Richmond area, please reach out. If you're in the area of Mudgee, Mudgee, if you're in the Mudgee area, please reach out. And actually, if you're in South Australia, also let us know.
I'm so excited to get this recording out there. Floating around to bring in even more trauma-informed facilitators for Australia. And
I want to highly recommend Prison Yoga Project's foundational training, please.
Can
you put that on the link?
I'm gonna absolutely put the link in right now.
Because the foundational training can be done at your own pace. It's ideally 6 weeks, isn't it? But
you know, I would say having kind of a container within, you know, there's a potency of staying within the work.
Yeah.
But so the foundational training is how I got involved with Prison Yoga Project. I was really just blown away by this training. And it just really opened something inside of me. Rage, grief, compassion, understanding. It opened up so many things inside of me, but I needed to take a break during some of the training, right? I was like, okay, like I need to sit with this. And that is what I really love about this self-paced piece, is that so you can sit with these, the paradox really of so much of this work. And it's about 24 hours of self-paced training, which I think it's quite accessible as well. You know, we have podcasts and videos, so it's not all just reading training. We offer 4 2-hour workshops, which really bring in this embodiment piece of the work that we do. So yeah, thank you so much for bringing up the foundational training.
The other thing I did want to point out that with that foundational training, and we have had some feedback, which I've passed on to you guys already, is that there is a module there that talks about, I guess, America's racial issues and the history of that. And, you know, that sometimes is a module that, you know, people from other countries have looked at that and gone, oh, that doesn't, I don't need to know that because my country is different. We've got our own history and that's more important for me. And whilst there's a lot of comparisons, you know, learning about redlining is not something that we don't have that issue here, for example. So I think just keeping that in mind, that there is this module there, you know, and we can work around what that may look like in terms of the completion of that module, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also something to bring up too, you know, you've done all of this research, and actually, you know, the whole piece of this webinar is this cultural awareness, right? And so for a facilitator to have a deep understanding of the cultural history and harm that has been caused is important to be able to go in and facilitate. So maybe we'll be able to get a little Australian module added.
I'm working on that. It's been a while that I've been working on that module, so I just haven't gotten around to and I think the issue sometimes in working with these specific things is that the numbers change, right? The statistics change, and that's okay because we can just reference that it was at a point in time, but the issues are still the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And those numbers can always be updated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I will give you the microphone again for any last pieces that haven't been said today, or anything that you just want people to hold as they walk through their Saturday.
Firstly, I just really want to thank you guys, Blair and Prison Yoga Project, for supporting myself and the teachers here so much, way beyond any expectation I ever had. And just know, I think for anyone who's listening to this, knowing that you have so much potential to contribute in any way. It doesn't have to be in a prison facility, you know. It can work, it can be in domestic violence shelters. You're still working with human beings who, like all of us, had a need for belonging, a need to be cared for, a need to be acknowledged. And, you know, so finding those avenues that speak to you, whether it's in a prison setting or not, because the people who are in prison are in our community as well. Do you know what I mean? And unfortunately, the recidivism rates are such that they'll cycle back out into community and perhaps sometimes back into prison. So, you know, the people that you're dealing with on the outside or on the inside, you might be dealing with them outside as well. So how do we hold space for all of our humanity? and that we're all susceptible to poor choices and to factors in our lives that are out of our control. So I'd just say to her, if this is work that you want to do, then perhaps see where in other parts of your community can you do this.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining us. This was one of my favorite webinars. This was an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I can see a comment there in the Q&A, so I just thought I'd point that out to you, Blair.
Oh, let's see.
And Maria is an amazing supporter of ours in Western Australia, so I really want to acknowledge her because she's got so much dedication and passion. But you'll see her comment there, which you might want to share.
So I'll speak to this too. So Maria says, Sonia, I applaud your passion and persistence. Congrats, and keep doing what you're doing. However, even with the continuing with training, unfortunately, there is so much red tape within government and systems. Western Australia. Yeah. At the moment, all restorative programs have been cut back due to lack of funding.
And so this is, I guess, even more so why I speak to this thing about if your purpose is to take this practice to people who are marginalised in any way, then it doesn't have to be in the prison system. You know, it could be, like I just spoke the other day, I went to what we call a PCYC, or maybe I think in the US it's a YMCA. So it's like a community, I think it's called the Police Citizens Youth Club. So it's sort of run by the Queensland, well, here in Queensland, it's the Queensland Police Service. So, but it's a space where youth in particular can go and do all sorts of activities and programs, and it sort of caters for kids who are perhaps on the fringes a little bit or at risk. And I just popped in there the other day and I was talking to a lady there about something completely different and telling her what I do. She just asked and I was telling her what I do, and she goes, oh, maybe you can do a program here because we've got women here, we've got a domestic violence program that we run here. Great. So it's that stuff that, and the thing is, you have to do the work. It's not going to come to you. You really have to do the work. And whilst, you know, when there's opportunities, I'm happy to go, hey, we've got an opportunity. Do you want to come and do this work? That's great. But you have to do the work. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart.
God, no.
Thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Love this conversation.
I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.